My friend, let me ask you, what would you do if the person you trusted most, the father of your child, kicked you in front of everyone you knew? Have you ever felt that kind of betrayal, where the pain cuts so deep it almost steals your breath? Tonight, I want you to walk with me through a story that will break your heart and heal it. Trust me, you'll want to hear every word. Please like, share, and subscribe. The ballroom was alive with laughter, music, and the faint clinking of champagne glasses. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above a sea of tuxedos and glittering gowns. To the outside world, it was just another night of indulgence for the city's elite. But hidden beneath the glamour, something darker was about to unfold. Sophia Carter walked in slowly, one hand resting protectively on her 6-month pregnant belly. Her dress was modest compared to the shimmering gowns around her, a soft cream color that clung gently to her growing figure. She was nervous, but her heart carried a small hope. Her husband, Damien Carter, had promised that tonight would be different, that he would introduce her proudly, that he would show the world that she was still his wife and the mother of his child. She had believed him because she wanted to believe. For months, whispers of his affair had circulated. Rumors of late-night meetings, photos of him with a younger woman, and the gut-wrenching moments when he would come home smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. She had chosen silence, convincing herself that once he saw her tonight, once he saw the life they had created together, he would change. But as she stepped into the glittering crowd, her hope began to crumble. Damien stood near the center of the ballroom, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a tuxedo cut sharp enough to slice through steel. His confidence filled the room. And draped over his arm was Elena Ross, the mistress everyone whispered about. Elena was stunning in a crimson dress that hugged her curves, her laughter high and throaty as she whispered in Damien's ear. He smiled down at her, not noticing the pregnant wife slowly walking closer, clutching her small purse like a shield. Sophia's heart pounded. She told herself to stay calm, to simply approach, to smile, to remind Damien of who she was. She had been his partner for 8 years, the woman who had stood by him when he had nothing, who had believed in him before the money, the success, the luxury. She wanted the world to see her place beside him, not the mistress flaunting on his arm. When Damien finally noticed her, the room seemed to hush. His eyes widened briefly, then narrowed with irritation. He wasn't happy to see her. No, he was embarrassed. Embarrassed that his pregnant wife had dared to show up uninvited, that she might ruin the image he was trying to project to his investors and friends. "What are you doing here?" he hissed under his breath as she reached him. Her lips trembled. "Damien, I just wanted to be here. I thought." But she didn't get to finish. Elena let out a mocking laugh, her eyes glittering with cruelty. "Oh, Damien, you didn't tell me she was coming. How quaint. She looks like she came from the clearance rack." The group of men around them chuckled awkwardly, unsure whether to laugh at the mistress's cruelty or pretend they hadn't heard. Sophia's face burned. She felt the sting of tears forming, but she held them back. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. Damien's jaw tightened. He wanted her gone, and he didn't care how. "You should leave, Sophia. You're embarrassing me." She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "Please, Damien, don't do this. I'm your wife. I'm carrying your child." For a moment, a flicker of humanity crossed his face. But then Elena whispered something in his ear, and his expression hardened into stone. The next moment would sear itself into Sophia's memory forever. In front of his friends, his investors, his mistress, and dozens of flashing cameras, Damien shoved Sophia's hand away and kicked her, hard, sending her stumbling backward. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Her cry pierced the music as she clutched her stomach, trying to protect the baby inside. She fell against a chair, the pain shooting through her body like fire. The crowd froze. Some covered their mouths. Others turned away in shame, pretending not to have seen. Elena smirked, satisfied, as if the kick had been aimed at her rival's dignity as much as her body. Damien straightened his tuxedo, his expression cold, and muttered, "Pathetic." Sophia's hands shook as she tried to push herself upright. Every eye in the room was on her, but no one moved to help. The people she once considered friends avoided her gaze, terrified of crossing the powerful man standing above her. She had never felt so alone. Her heart raced with fear for the baby. She pressed her palm against her belly, whispering, "Stay with me, please." And in that moment, a fire began to burn inside her chest. The humiliation cut deep, but the rage went deeper. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. As Damien turned his back to her and laughed with Alina as though nothing had happened, Sophia made a silent vow. She would endure the pain. She would survive this night. And when the time was right, she would rise again. Not as the broken wife Damien thought he had destroyed, but as a woman ready to bring him and his mistress to their knees. And none of them, not Damien, not Alina, not the so-called friends who stood frozen tonight, had any idea of the storm that was about to come. Sophia Carter hadn't always lived in glittering ballrooms or walked beneath chandeliers that cost more than her childhood home. Long before her name became attached to Damien Carter, she had been just Sophia Reyes, a girl from a modest neighborhood in Ohio, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a diner. Life was never easy, but it taught Sophia resilience. She grew up understanding the value of sacrifice, watching her mother give up everything so her daughter could have a better chance. Her childhood was painted with simple joys: reading borrowed books under the dim light of a street lamp, playing with neighborhood kids on cracked sidewalks, and dreaming of something more. She never believed she'd live in a mansion or be photographed at charity galas. Her dreams were smaller but heartfelt: to finish school, to have a family, to be loved. When she earned a scholarship to a state university, it felt like a miracle. Sophia studied hard, juggling part-time jobs as a barista and a library assistant to pay for what her scholarship didn't cover. She majored in business administration, not because she was passionate about numbers, but because she believed it could open doors to stability. She wanted to break the cycle of struggle for herself and for the family she hoped to have one day. It was during her junior year that she met Damien. He wasn't the billionaire tycoon he would later become. Back then, he was a smooth-talking salesman with dreams bigger than his bank account. He worked at a car dealership near campus, and Sophia had walked in one rainy afternoon, desperate for a reliable used car to drive to work and classes. Damien had spotted her immediately. His charm was magnetic: broad smile, confident voice, the kind of man who could make you feel like the center of the universe with just a glance. He sold her the car, but more than that, he sold her the dream of being loved. He showered her with attention, bringing her coffee during late-night study sessions, surprising her with flowers he said he'd borrowed from display tables at work. For Sophia, who had never known steady affection, it felt like magic. Within a year, they were inseparable. Damien proposed in the most dramatic way he could afford, in the middle of a crowded park with a cheap silver ring and a promise that one day I'll give you the world. Sophia said yes, not because of the ring, but because of the sincerity she thought she saw in his eyes. They married young, with barely enough money to pay the rent on a one-bedroom apartment. But Sophia didn't care. She believed in him. She believed in them. She worked tirelessly, holding down a steady job at a small bookstore while supporting Damien's ever-changing career pursuits. He jumped from sales to real estate to small investments, and she stood by him, cooking late dinners, encouraging him when deals fell through, and reminding him that success took time. When Damien finally landed a breakthrough in real estate, Sophia was there, carrying boxes into their first real office, answering phones, and filing contracts without pay. She was his unpaid secretary, his quiet partner, and his most loyal cheerleader. Every win he celebrated, she celebrated too. Every late-night meeting, she stayed awake for his return. When his company began to thrive, he credited himself for the genius moves. But Sophia knew the truth. She had carried him through the early years, sacrificing her own ambitions to fuel his. And then came the baby. When Sophia found out she was pregnant, she had cried tears of joy. To her, it was the final piece of the life she'd always wanted: a family. Damien had seemed happy at first, kissing her belly, telling her they would raise a child in luxury, far from the hardships she had endured as a girl. She thought it was proof that all her sacrifices had been worth it. But slowly, things changed. Damien grew colder. The more successful he became, the more distant he was. Business trips stretched into nights out. Lavish dinners were spent with colleagues she never met. And whispers of Elena, the mistress, began to creep into Sophia's life. At first, she refused to believe them. She told herself she was paranoid, that her husband was just busy, but deep down she knew. She could see it in the way he stopped looking at her, in the way his laughter was louder with others than with her. Still, she held on. She believed love meant endurance, that marriage meant forgiveness. She endured the loneliness of a large, empty mansion. She endured the snide remarks about her boring maternity dresses. She endured the humiliation of being excluded from public appearances. For Sophia, the only thing that mattered was the tiny heartbeat inside her, the child who kicked gently when she cried, as if reminding her that she wasn't alone. But love built on sacrifice can only hold so much weight. Every cruel word, every late night, every trace of perfume that wasn't hers chipped away at the woman who had once believed in fairy tales. And yet, even as her marriage crumbled, Sophia clung to one truth. She was stronger than he realized. Damien might see her as fragile, as someone to discard, but she knew the fire inside her had not died. She had survived poverty. She had survived heartbreak. She had survived humiliation. She would survive this too. Her only mistake was believing that endurance was enough. But endurance had its limits, and the night Damien kicked her in front of his friends and his mistress, that limit was shattered. Because deep inside, Sophia's story was not just one of betrayal. It was the story of a woman who would rise again, not as the timid wife who once stood in Damien's shadow, but as a force that would destroy both him and the mistress who mocked her. And the first crack in Damien's perfect empire was about to appear sooner than anyone expected. The Carter Foundation Charity Gala was supposed to be the highlight of the season. Every year, the city's most powerful families gathered under one gilded roof to sip champagne, pledge donations, and measure each other's worth by the sparkle of their jewels and the weight of their last investment. For Damien Carter, it was more than just a gala. It was his stage, his chance to parade himself as a king among lesser men. The Metropolitan Hotel ballroom glistened like a palace carved out of light. Marble floors reflected the glow of massive chandeliers, while gold-trimmed drapes cascaded from 20-foot ceilings. Tables draped in silk overflowed with roses imported from Italy, and crystal glasses filled with vintage wine. A string quartet played softly in the corner, but their music was drowned out by the chatter of billion-dollar deals and the self-satisfied laughter of men who believed they owned the world. On this night, every detail mattered. Journalists from society magazines lingered near the entrance, their cameras flashing with every notable arrival. Young women in sequined gowns whispered behind jeweled clutches, trading gossip about who was secretly bankrupt, who had married for power, and who was cheating with whom. Men in tuxedos circled like wolves, their smiles sharp, their handshakes colder than ice. And at the center of it all, Damien thrived. He moved through the crowd like a conductor directing a symphony of admiration. He had cultivated this image for years. The self-made success, the billionaire who could charm senators and CEOs with a single smirk. Tonight, he wore it proudly, his hand resting on Elena's back, as though she were a prize he had won. Elena, of course, basked in the attention. Her red dress shimmered under the chandeliers, and every flick of her hair was calculated for maximum effect. She laughed too loudly, leaned too close, and flaunted Damien as though she were daring anyone to challenge her place at his side. For the first time, she was not the hidden mistress. Tonight, she was the woman Damien wanted the world to see. What neither of them expected was the quiet storm walking through the entrance in a cream maternity gown. Sophia's arrival was not accompanied by flashing cameras or whispered admiration. She wasn't draped in diamonds, and her dress wasn't made by some famous designer. But she carried something Elena did not: dignity. Even with fear twisting inside her, she held her head high as she walked past the curious stares. Her presence was a reminder that Damien Carter was still married, that he had a wife, and that wife carried his child. The ballroom reacted as though an invisible glass had shattered. Conversations faltered. The musicians stumbled on their notes. Eyes shifted quickly from Damien to Sophia, then to Elena. The tension was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. Damien's friends, men who had shared whiskey with him in private clubs and laughed at his cruel jokes, watched carefully. Their expressions betrayed what they truly thought, that Sophia didn't belong here. To them, she was a disruption to the spectacle. Their loyalty was not to her, but to Damien's power. Sophia felt every stare like a dagger. She wanted to turn and leave to escape the suffocating silence, but she kept walking, her heels tapping against the marble floor with quiet determination. Her hand never left her belly. Her baby was with her, and that gave her strength. She reached Damien just as the cameras shifted, clicking furiously to capture the scandalous tableau: a wealthy man, his glamorous mistress, and the pregnant wife who dared to show up uninvited. "Darling," Sophia said softly, her voice trembling but clear, "I wanted to stand with you tonight." The words should have softened him. They should have reminded him of who she was, of everything she had given. But Damien's face hardened like granite. He leaned close, his voice sharp enough to pierce her heart. "You don't belong here, Sophia. Go home before you embarrass yourself further." Her lips parted in shock. She wanted to plead, to remind him of the baby, but before she could, Elena leaned in with a wicked smile. "Oh, let her stay," Elena purred, her voice loud enough for their circle to hear. "It will be fun for everyone to see the difference between us." The men around them chuckled nervously. Some lifted their glasses as though toasting Damien's audacity. Others looked away, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire. Sophia's face burned, but she stood her ground. The orchestra struck up a new tune, a dramatic waltz that seemed to mock her trembling heart. Damien's investors and associates gathered closer, hungry for entertainment, pretending to be engrossed in conversation while their eyes devoured the unfolding scandal. Sophia felt her baby kick inside her. It was a tiny push, but it reminded her she wasn't alone. She straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to meet Damien's eyes. "I am your wife," she whispered fiercely, "and I deserve to stand beside you." That was when Damien snapped. His mask of charm cracked, revealing the cruelty underneath. In one swift motion, he shoved her hand aside and delivered the brutal kick that sent her stumbling. Gasps tore through the ballroom. Cameras flashed. The music stopped. Sophia collapsed against a chair, clutching her stomach, her cry echoing through the hall like a broken note. For a moment silence reigned, and then the whispers began. Some horrified, some gleeful, all poisonous. Did he just... in front of everyone? My God, she's pregnant. But Damien didn't flinch. He adjusted his tuxedo, smirked at Elena, and said coldly, "Some people don't know their place." The cruelty of it all seared into Sophia's soul. She looked around desperately for help, but no one moved. Not one so-called friend, not one of Damien's powerful allies stepped forward. And in that moment of betrayal, not just by her husband but by everyone who watched, something inside her broke. And something else was born. Because humiliation in front of the world can destroy a woman, or it can create a storm no man is prepared to face. Damien Carter had always loved control. From the time he was a struggling salesman, he discovered that charm could be a weapon sharper than any blade. He had learned how to smile at the right people, flatter the right egos, and twist words into gold. To outsiders, he was the story of the American dream. A man who built an empire from nothing. But behind the polished mask was a hunger that could never be satisfied. He had grown addicted to the feeling of being admired. Every deal closed, every article praising him, every photograph that placed him among the city's elite, these were his fuel. And when that hunger mixed with pride, it created a monster. To Damien, Sophia was no longer the woman who once lifted him up. She was a reminder of the years he wanted to forget. The years of scraping by, of counting pennies, of driving a second-hand car. By the time he had wealth, he saw her not as a partner, but as a weight. She was quiet, simple, dressed modestly, unwilling to change herself to match the glittering new world he had built. She wasn't glamorous. She didn't sparkle under the chandeliers the way Elena did. And worst of all, she carried a child, something that reminded him of responsibility when all he wanted was freedom. Damien told himself he deserved more. More excitement, more attention, more beauty. That was when Elena Ross entered his life like a flame. Elena had been a junior marketing associate at one of Damien's partner firms. 26 years old, bold and unapologetically ambitious, she had the kind of beauty that demanded a second look. Her hair was jet black, her lips always painted in daring red, and her laugh carried across any room. She was not content to be unnoticed. She wanted power, and she was willing to use her allure to get it. The first time Damien saw her, she leaned against a marble bar at a private event, sipping champagne as if she owned the place. She caught his eye and didn't look away. That was all it took. Their affair began in secret, stolen moments in hotel rooms, whispered phone calls after midnight, gifts bought with company funds disguised as business expenses. Alina fed Damien's ego like no one else. She called him brilliant, untouchable, a man destined to rule the city. She made him believe he was a god. And unlike Sophia, Alina never asked him to slow down, never spoke of responsibility or sacrifice. She was fire and danger, and Damien craved it. Soon, she wasn't just a mistress, she was his addiction. What Elena wanted, however, went beyond affection. She didn't just want Damien's attention, she wanted his world. She wanted the mansion, the luxury cars, the invitations to galas, the headline photos. She was tired of being someone's secret, she wanted to be seen. Sophia was the obstacle. To Alina, Sophia was laughable. A small-town wife, who didn't know how to dress, who clung to her belly as though pregnancy were a badge of honor, instead of, in Elena's eyes, a weakness. Alina mocked her behind closed doors, imitating her simple manner of speaking, ridiculing the way she dressed in department store dresses, while others wore couture. Alina had convinced Damien that Sophia was a burden holding him back from the life he truly deserved. And Damien, blinded by arrogance, believed her. The idea of discarding his wife felt less like betrayal and more like progress. But the true cruelty wasn't just their affair, it was how they flaunted it. Damien began taking Elena to business events, introducing her to investors, whispering in her ear while cameras flashed. He wanted the world to see him as bold enough to replace his wife before even divorcing her. Elena encouraged it, loving the shock, loving the whispers, loving how society began to shift their gazes from Sophia to her. The night of the gala, the cruelty reached its peak. Damien wanted to prove something, that he was untouchable, that even his pregnant wife could be humiliated without consequence. And Elena wanted to bask in that moment, to watch Sophia crumble in public. When Damien kicked Sophia, Elena's smirk told the truth. She enjoyed it. She didn't flinch, didn't gasp like the others. Instead, she smiled as if she had finally won. For her, it wasn't just about stealing Damien, it was about erasing Sophia entirely. But arrogance is dangerous. Neither Damien nor Elena noticed the cameras flashing, the reporters scribbling notes, the shocked expressions of guests who would whisper about that night for months. They believed their power protected them, that no scandal could touch them. What they didn't know was that power can shift in an instant. And when it shifts, it doesn't just fall, it crashes. Sophia's tears that night weren't the tears of defeat. They were the quiet storm building behind her eyes. While Damien and Elena laughed in their arrogance, Sophia was already changing. The humiliation had cracked something inside her, and through that crack, strength was pouring in. Damien thought he had broken her. Elena thought she had erased her. But both of them had made the same fatal mistake. They underestimated the woman they believed was powerless. And by the time they realized what Sophia was truly capable of, it would already be too late. The sound of Sophia's cry after Damien's kick still lingered in the ballroom long after the music stopped. For a moment, the glamorous crowd stood paralyzed, unsure whether to look at her, at Damien, or at the floor. The silence was louder than any symphony, heavy with judgment and cowardice. Sophia lay against the edge of a chair, her arms wrapped around her stomach, trying desperately to shield the baby within. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Pain radiated through her, not just from the cruel kick, but from the realization of what had just happened. The man she once trusted with her life had humiliated her in front of the entire world. But if she expected help, she didn't find it. The women whispered behind jeweled hands, their eyes wide with pity or curiosity. The men shifted uncomfortably, sipping champagne to mask their guilt for doing nothing. These were people who smiled at her at dinners, who once praised her for her kindness, who claimed to be her friends. Yet not one of them moved to lift her up. Reporters stationed at the entrance had rushed forward, cameras clicking with merciless speed. The flashes lit the room like lightning. Their lenses didn't miss a thing. The mistress smirking in red, the billionaire standing tall, and the pregnant wife on the floor, clutching her belly. Within hours, the photos would spread across social media, plastered on gossip sites, dissected on news channels. Sophia forced herself to stand. Her knees trembled, her face pale, but she would not give Damien the satisfaction of seeing her collapse. With one hand on the chair for support and the other on her stomach, she rose slowly. Her eyes swept across the sea of faces, searching for a trace of humanity. None came. "Are you all right, Mrs. Carter?" a timid voice finally asked. It belonged not to a guest, but to a young waiter standing near the edge of the crowd. He had dropped his tray in shock at the scene. His question was a whisper compared to the silence, but it carried weight. Sophia gave the faintest nod, swallowing back tears. She wanted to scream, to rage at the crowd for their silence, but her dignity forced her lips closed. Damien, meanwhile, acted as if nothing had happened. He lifted his glass, took a slow sip of wine, and turned his attention back to his associates. His tone was calm, arrogant. "Now where were we?" The cruelty was unbearable. Elena clung to his arm, her laughter bubbling up again, as though Sophia's pain were entertainment. To them, she was nothing more than an obstacle that had been removed. Sophia felt her chest tighten with humiliation. The whispers around her grew louder. "She looks so weak. Can you believe he did that?" She should have stayed home. What did she expect? Her vision blurred, not just from tears, but from the weight of shame pressing down on her. She had been reduced to nothing in their eyes, a foolish wife who dared to step into a world where she no longer belonged. But humiliation has a strange way of birthing clarity. In that moment, Sophia understood something important. The people in that room would never defend her. They had chosen their side, and it was Damien's. To them, she was expendable. To Damien, she was disposable. She drew in a shaky breath, straightened her back as best she could, and began walking toward the exit. Every step was agony, but every step also felt like a declaration. She would not let them see her fall. The cameras followed her. Flash after flash captured her swollen belly, her tear-streaked face, her trembling hands. By the time she pushed open the ballroom doors, her humiliation was immortalized. The city would wake up to her disgrace. Outside, the cold night air hit her like a slap. She leaned against a pillar, trying to steady herself. Her chest heaved, her stomach clenched, and fear for her baby nearly crushed her. She whispered again, "Stay with me, please," as if her child could hear and understand. She wanted to call a taxi, to disappear into the night, but the paparazzi swarmed like vultures. Questions were shouted, cameras shoved in her face. "Did Damien hit you, Mrs. Carter? Is the baby safe? Are you planning to divorce him?" Sophia covered her face, pushing past the frenzy. The flashes were blinding, the voices deafening. She wanted nothing more than to vanish, to crawl into a place where no one could see her brokenness. By the time she reached the curb, tears had already streaked her makeup. She climbed into a waiting cab, her voice barely audible as she gave the address of her home. The driver didn't ask questions. He had seen enough scandals in this city to recognize one when it unfolded. As the car pulled away, Sophia stared out the window at the glittering skyline. The city sparkled, but all she saw was betrayal. Her heart ached, her body trembled, but deep inside, something was shifting. That night, the internet exploded. Videos surfaced within hours, showing Damien's kick from every angle. Hashtags trended worldwide. Justice for Sophia, Damien the monster, pregnant and abused. Public opinion turned fast. But in the world of the wealthy, scandal could be buried with money. Damien believed it would blow over, that his lawyers and publicists would silence the noise, that his empire was untouchable. He laughed in Elena's ear as he scrolled through headlines, dismissing them as jealous nobodies with too much time online. What he didn't know was that Sophia had reached her breaking point. She had spent years enduring, forgiving, sacrificing. That night ended all of it. The humiliation didn't destroy her. It freed her, because Sophia was no longer the timid wife who waited at home. She was a mother fighting for her child. She was a woman betrayed, broken, and ready to rise. And Damien was about to learn that the woman he kicked in front of his friends was the same woman who would bring his empire to its knees. The cab ride home was quiet, but inside Sophia's chest a storm raged. The hum of the city outside, the neon lights flickering across the windows, the driver's silence, none of it mattered. Her world had ended on that ballroom floor. When the cab pulled up to the gates of the Carter estate, Sophia hesitated. The mansion loomed before her, its marble pillars glowing in the moonlight, the kind of house people dreamed of owning. But to her, it no longer felt like home. It was a gilded cage, and tonight, the cage had snapped shut. She stepped out slowly, clutching her stomach. The driver offered to help, but she shook her head. Pride wouldn't let her lean on anyone. She walked up the long driveway alone, each step echoing her emptiness. Inside, the mansion was silent. No staff lingered. No warm lights greeted her. The rooms, usually so meticulously staged for Damien's guests, felt cold and hollow. She collapsed onto the velvet couch in the living room, her body trembling. Tears spilled freely now. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing for everything she had lost: her dignity, her marriage, the life she thought she had built. She cried for her mother, who had warned her once that charm without respect was poison. She cried for the little girl she had been, the one who dreamed of love, only to grow into a woman humiliated by the very man she trusted most. Her phone buzzed on the table. Messages poured in. Headlines, gossip links, concerned notes from distant acquaintances who hadn't spoken to her in years, but now wanted to bask in the drama. She couldn't bring herself to read them. She turned the phone face down, as though ignoring it would erase the humiliation. But she couldn't ignore the voice in her head. How could he do this to me? How could he do this to our baby? The memory of Damien's foot striking her, of Elena's smirk, replayed again and again until she felt sick. She rushed to the bathroom, retching violently, gripping the porcelain sink for support. When it was over, she stared at her reflection. Her makeup was smeared, her hair disheveled, her eyes red and swollen. She barely recognized herself. "This isn't me," she whispered hoarsely. But the truth was brutal. It was her. She was the broken wife who had been kicked in public, who had walked away with tears streaming down her face while the world watched. For days, she barely left her bedroom. The curtains stayed closed. The meals the staff left at her door remained untouched. She lay curled on the bed, one hand always on her belly, whispering apologies to her unborn child. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to feel that pain." The tabloids feasted on her silence. Paparazzi camped outside the gates, hungry for the next photograph. Opinion pieces filled newspapers, some condemning Damien, others blaming her. Strangers online debated her life like it was entertainment. Why did she even show up at the gala? She knew he had a mistress. What did she expect? She should leave him, but she won't. Women like her never do. Every cruel comment dug deeper into her wounds. She felt stripped bare, dissected for the world's amusement. She wanted to vanish, to disappear into the shadows and never be seen again. At night, sleep didn't come. Instead, memories haunted her. The early days when Damien brought her coffee, the way he looked at her when they said their vows, the nights they dreamed about their future. Was it all a lie? Or had the man she loved truly become a stranger? Her body ached, not just from pregnancy but from despair. She stopped brushing her hair, stopped answering the phone, stopped caring about anything beyond keeping her baby safe. Days blurred together, each one heavier than the last. One evening, she stood in the nursery. The room was painted a soft sky blue, the crib Damien had ordered sitting in the corner, untouched. A tiny blanket embroidered with the baby's name lay folded neatly on the rocking chair. Sophia ran her fingers across the fabric, her tears dripping onto the thread. For the first time, a terrifying thought entered her mind. Maybe they'd be better off without me. Maybe I'm too weak to raise this child alone. The thought sent a chill through her. She shook her head violently, clutching her stomach. No, I can't think like that. I won't. But the darkness lingered. She felt trapped between despair and responsibility, between the urge to collapse and the need to survive. One morning, as she sat by the window staring at nothing, her phone buzzed again. She ignored it, but a few moments later, it buzzed once more, and again. Frustrated, she finally reached for it. It wasn't gossip this time. It was a message from an unknown number. "Sophia, I saw what happened. You don't deserve this. Meet me. I can help." Her breath caught. She read it again and again. The number wasn't saved, but something about the message felt urgent, real. Could it be a trap? A journalist fishing for a story? Or was it someone who truly cared? She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the screen. Then another message came. "You're stronger than you think. Don't let them break you. Tomorrow, noon, Café Verona." Sophia's heart raced. Someone out there believed in her, someone who thought she wasn't finished. But who? For the first time since the gala, a spark flickered inside her. She didn't know who was waiting at Cafe Verona. She didn't know if she could trust them. But she knew one thing: she couldn't keep drowning in despair. And the moment she decided to step out of the shadows, the tide of her story began to turn. The following morning, sunlight streamed into the mansion for the first time in days. Sophia hadn't opened the curtains herself, the staff must have, but she didn't stop them. Something in her had shifted since the mysterious text. She no longer wanted to sit in darkness. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy dress that hid her swollen belly but gave her enough strength to face the outside world. As she looked in the mirror, she saw the traces of despair still etched in her face, but beneath them was something new: resolve. At noon, she arrived at Cafe Verona, a small, elegant spot tucked away on a quiet street. It was the kind of place where deals were whispered over cappuccinos and secrets exchanged between the clink of porcelain cups. She walked in cautiously, her eyes scanning the room, and then she saw him. At a corner table sat a man she hadn't seen in years, Michael Torres, her childhood friend. He stood immediately when he saw her, his dark eyes filled with both concern and warmth. Michael had grown from the boy she remembered into a man with the kind of confidence that came from success earned, not inherited. "Sophia," he said softly, pulling out a chair for her. "I'm so sorry for what you've been through. I saw everything." She sat down, her hands trembling slightly. "Everyone saw." Michael shook his head. "Everyone saw, but no one acted. That's what makes me sick. He humiliated you in front of the world, and they all let it happen." Sophia lowered her gaze. "Because he's powerful. And I'm just his wife." Michael leaned closer. "You're not just his wife, you're Sophia, and I think you've forgotten who you really are." She frowned, confusion flickering across her face. "What do you mean?" Michael pulled out a folder from his leather briefcase. Inside were papers, photographs, and financial statements. "Damien thinks he owns everything, but I've been following his trail for months. His empire isn't as bulletproof as he makes it seem. He's reckless, Sophia. He's been using company funds for his affair with Elena, laundering money through shell corporations, bribing officials. I have evidence, solid evidence." Her breath caught. She stared at the documents, her heart pounding. "Why? Why are you showing me this?" "Because you deserve justice. And because if you want to fight back, you can't do it with tears. You need power. This," he tapped the folder, "is power." Sophia's mind raced. For months she had felt powerless, trapped in Damien's world, suffocating under his control. But here, for the first time, was proof that he wasn't untouchable. He could bleed. Michael's voice softened. "I know you, Sophia. You've always been stronger than you realize. Damien built his empire on your sacrifices. You stood by him when no one else did. And now he thinks he can throw you away like garbage? No, you don't have to let him. We can bring him down." She closed her eyes, gripping the edge of the table. Part of her still wanted to run, to hide, to protect her baby from more chaos. But another part, the part that had been humiliated in front of flashing cameras, was rising. "What do I have to do?" she asked quietly. Michael smiled faintly. "First, take care of yourself. The baby comes first. But once you're ready, we'll move. We'll leak the right documents to the press. We'll alert the authorities. And when the time is right, we'll expose Damien for what he really is." Sophia's hands tightened around the folder. She imagined Damien's smug face, Elena's cruel smirk, the crowd's silence as she cried out in pain. Rage simmered inside her, no longer a wildfire but a steady, controlled burn. "I won't let him get away with this," she whispered. "Not anymore." Over the next few weeks, Sophia transformed. She still carried the wounds of humiliation, but now they fueled her instead of breaking her. She began seeing a doctor regularly, ensuring her baby was safe. She met with lawyers Michael recommended, discreetly preparing for divorce. And late at night, when the mansion was silent, she studied the evidence Michael had given her. Damien, meanwhile, continued flaunting Elena. He brushed off the scandal as overblown gossip, paid off reporters, and charmed investors with promises of new ventures. But behind his arrogance, cracks were forming. Whispers of mismanagement began circulating. Rumors of his temper leaked, and quietly Sophia's team pushed the right documents into the right hands. One morning, Damien stormed into the mansion, his face red with fury. "What the hell are you doing, Sophia?" he shouted. She looked up from the breakfast table, her calm composure unsettling him. "Eating breakfast? Why?" "Don't play games with me. Someone's leaking my financial records. My investors are calling non-stop. Do you know anything about this?" Sophia held his gaze steadily. Maybe the truth has a way of finding its own light. His eyes narrowed. For the first time he seemed unsure, even rattled. "You think you can fight me? You're nothing without me." Sophia stood slowly, her hand resting on her belly. "No, Damien, I was everything before you. And you're about to learn that I'm not the one who's nothing. You are." His jaw tightened, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He stormed out, barking orders at his assistant. Sophia sat back down, her lips curling into the faintest smile. The tide was turning. Still doubt gnawed at her in quiet moments. Could she really defeat him? Could she protect her baby while dismantling his empire? Or would Damien strike back with the kind of vengeance that could destroy her completely? Late one night, she stood on the balcony, the city lights glowing like stars beneath her. She placed her hand over her heart and whispered, "I will not let him win." Behind her, the phone buzzed again. Another message from Michael. "Everything is set. Tomorrow, the first story breaks." Sophia turned, her eyes fierce, her voice steady, because tomorrow was the beginning of Damien Carter's downfall. The morning headlines struck Damien like a thunderbolt. Billionaire Damien Carter under investigation for fraud. Luxury empire built on lies? Insider claims Carter funneled millions to mistress. The front page of every major newspaper carried his face, not smiling in triumph at a gala, but scowling as he shoved his pregnant wife in front of flashing cameras. The image had gone viral, Damien's foot raised, Sophia clutching her stomach, Alina smirking in the background. It was damning, and now the financial records leaked by Michael only added fuel to the fire. Investors panicked. Shares of Carter Holdings plummeted. Board members who once praised Damien now whispered about betrayal. Lawsuits piled up, and the authorities launched a full investigation into his finances. For the first time in his life, Damien wasn't in control. Meanwhile, Sophia stood quietly at the center of the storm she had unleashed. She had chosen not to hide anymore. On the day the first exposé aired, she appeared on national television, composed, dignified, and glowing with the strength she had nearly forgotten she possessed. She wore a simple black dress, her baby bump visible, her voice steady. "I stayed silent for too long," she told the interviewer. "But silence only protects abusers. My husband humiliated me, betrayed me, and endangered me and my unborn child. He believed I was powerless. But women are never powerless, not when they decide to rise." Her words reverberated across the country. Social media exploded with support. Thousands of women shared their own stories under the hashtag #RiseWithSophia. What had begun as humiliation was now a movement. Damien watched the broadcast from his penthouse, his hands shaking as he hurled a glass against the wall. Alina tried to soothe him, but even she looked uneasy. The man she had attached herself to was slipping, and with him, so was her chance at the life she craved. "Don't worry," Damien growled. "I'll fix this. She doesn't know who she's dealing with." But for once, he was wrong. The following week, Sophia filed for divorce. Unlike the timid woman he thought he had broken, she came armed with lawyers, evidence, and public opinion on her side. The courtroom overflowed with reporters, cameras flashing as she walked in with her head high. Damien sneered across the aisle, but his smirk faltered when Sophia's attorneys laid out the case. The fraud, the embezzlement, the abuse. Document after document was presented, each one a nail in the coffin of his empire. Elena's name appeared in the evidence too. Records of lavish gifts purchased with stolen company money, photographs of luxury trips billed as business expenses, and even texts where she bragged about bleeding him dry. She sat in the gallery, her face pale as her name became synonymous with scandal. When the judge asked Sophia if she had anything to say, she rose slowly. "I gave Damien everything," she said, her voice strong. "My youth, my loyalty, my love. And he repaid me with betrayal and violence. I stand here today not as a victim, but as a mother, a woman, and a survivor. I won't let him define me. I will define myself." The courtroom erupted in applause, something rarely seen in such a setting. The judge silenced the crowd but couldn't hide her own look of respect. The divorce was granted swiftly. Sophia won full custody of her child, significant assets, and the Carter estate itself. Damien left the courthouse not as a billionaire titan but as a disgraced man, stripped of his empire and his reputation. Elena didn't fare better. With her name plastered across headlines, she became unemployable. Friends who once laughed at her jokes avoided her calls. She had hitched her future to Damien's fortune. And when it crumbled, so did she. Within months, she disappeared from the social scene entirely. For Sophia, however, life blossomed. She poured her energy into charities for women and children, using part of her settlement to create shelters for those fleeing abuse. Her story inspired thousands, and she became a symbol of resilience. One evening, months after the trial, Sophia sat on the porch of her estate, her baby boy cradled in her arms. The night air was calm, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Michael stepped outside, setting 2 mugs of tea on the table. "You did it," he said quietly. Sophia smiled down at her son. "No," she whispered, kissing the baby's forehead. "We did it. He gave me a reason to fight, and I'll never stop fighting. For him, for myself, for every woman who's been told she's powerless." The baby stirred softly, as if comforted by her words. Sophia leaned back, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Damien and Elena were nothing but shadows now. Their laughter, their arrogance, their cruelty, gone. What remained was Sophia's strength, forged in the fire of humiliation and reborn as something indestructible. Her revenge had not just destroyed them, it had rebuilt her. And as the world looked on, Sophia proved a truth no one could ever erase. When a woman rises, she cannot be stopped. All right, my friend, so the story has come to an end. And if you're still here with me right now, it means something in this journey has touched your heart in a way words alone can't explain. Sophia's story wasn't just about betrayal and revenge. It was about resilience, about rediscovering strength when the world tries to break you. Life often hands us moments of humiliation, of pain, of silence, when we expect others to stand for us and they don't. But as the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Sophia found that strength. She turned despair into dignity, shame into power, and heartbreak into healing. And so can you. Sometimes the people closest to us betray us. Sometimes the crowd stays silent when we need them to speak. But Epictetus reminded us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And Sophia chose to rise. She chose not to let Damien define her story. Instead, she rewrote it with courage, with love for her child, and with an unshakable belief that she was more than her pain. And maybe, just maybe, you needed to hear that today. That whatever storm you're facing, it doesn't have to be the end. It can be the beginning of something greater. So, my wonderful friends, if you felt even a spark of strength through this story, I ask you to like this video, share it with someone who might need hope tonight, and subscribe to this channel so we can keep walking through these stories together. Because no matter how dark the night, remember, a woman or a man who chooses to rise cannot be stopped.
Maya's voice cut through the marble halls of Belmont Industries like a blade. "You left your family for this?" she demanded, her eyes locked on the man who had once promised her forever. Daniel's face drained of all color as he stammered, I don't know this woman. She's clearly unstable." The words tumbled from his lips like poison, each one a fresh betrayal. Celeste, draped in designer perfection, looked at Maya with disgust. "Security? Get her out of here," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the polished walls. But it was little Liam's voice that shattered the tension. Tugging at his mother's hand, he looked up with innocent confusion and asked, "Why did Daddy lie, Mommy?" The silence that followed was deafening. The weight of betrayal hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Welcome back to Mr. Ashbourne Golden Narratives, where love, betrayal, and redemption collide in ways you never saw coming. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button because today's story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty, love, and the price of ambition. To my incredible subscribers, thank you for making this channel a place where real stories matter. Your comments and support fuel every narrative we share. Maya and Daniel Thomas had built their love on a foundation of dreams and determination. In their cramped one-bedroom apartment, where the walls seemed to breathe with their hopes, they had learned that happiness didn't require a bank account. Just calloused hands, warm hearts, and the kind of love that makes instant noodles taste like a feast. Maya would often catch Daniel staring at her while she folded their few belongings, his eyes soft with adoration. "What?" she'd ask, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," he'd whisper, pulling her close until she could feel his heartbeat against her cheek. Their son Liam was the light that made their small world complete. At 3 years old, he had his father's mischievous smile and his mother's gentle spirit. The boy would run to Daniel every evening when he returned from work, tiny arms stretched wide, shouting, "Daddy's home." Those were the moments when poverty felt like a distant concept. When love filled every corner of their modest life. The night Maya told Daniel about their second pregnancy, the joy in his eyes was unmistakable. She had waited until Liam was asleep, then sat beside him on their worn couch, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the pregnancy test in his palm. "Are you serious?" Daniel breathed, his voice barely a whisper. Maya nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We're going to have another baby." Daniel swept her into his arms, spinning her around their tiny living room until she laughed through her tears. "I love you so much, Maya. Our family is growing and I promise, I'm going to give you both everything you deserve." That promise felt solid then. Unbreakable. Like the foundation of everything they were building together. Life seemed to align with their dreams when Daniel received the promotion. Floor supervisor at one of the manufacturing plants owned by the mysterious Richard Belmont, a name whispered with equal parts fear and respect throughout the city. Belmont was a ghost in a suit, a billionaire who controlled industries but never showed his face. His factories were the heartbeat of their community, feeding hundreds of families, yet no one could claim to have truly met the man himself. "This is it, Maya," Daniel said the night he got the news, his eyes bright with possibility. "This is our chance to finally give Liam and the baby the life they deserve. A real house. A backyard. Maybe even that swing set Liam keeps talking about." Maya pressed her hand to her growing belly and smiled. "As long as we're together, we already have everything. But success has a way of attracting attention you never asked for." The day Celeste Belmont walked into that factory changed everything, though neither Maya nor Daniel knew it yet. She moved through the industrial space like a queen touring peasant lands, her designer heels clicking against concrete floors, her silk dress a stark contrast to the honest sweat and steel around her. Celeste Belmont was everything Maya had never aspired to be, polished to perfection, draped in wealth, carrying herself with the kind of entitlement that comes from never having to count coins or wonder where your next meal would come from. She was beautiful in the way that money makes possible, sculpted, refined, untouchable. When her eyes landed on Daniel directing a group of workers, his sleeves rolled up and shirt marked with the honest stains of hard work, something shifted in her expression. There was hunger there. Not love. Celeste had never learned the difference. She didn't ask his name. She didn't inquire about his character or his dreams. She simply decided she wanted him, the way she might choose a piece of jewelry from a display case. Comment below and tell me, what's the most dangerous kind of person to fall in love with? Someone who sees you as a trophy, or someone who never really sees you at all? Let me know your thoughts because this story is about to show you exactly why that matters. Over the following weeks, Celeste began orchestrating chance encounters. She would appear at the factory during Daniel's shifts, asking technical questions she didn't care about, complimenting his leadership skills, making him feel important in ways he had never experienced before. "You're wasted here," she told him one afternoon, her fingers brushing against his arm as she spoke. "A man with your potential should be running companies, not just supervising floors." Daniel felt something he had never felt with Maya, the intoxicating pull of being wanted by someone who seemed impossibly out of his league. Maya's love had always been steady, sure, built on shared struggles and genuine affection. But Celeste's attention felt like standing in spotlight he had never known existed. When Celeste finally revealed who she was, Richard Belmont's daughter and sole heir to an empire worth billions, Daniel's world tilted on its axis. This wasn't just attraction anymore. This was opportunity wrapped in silk and perfume, offering him a life he had only seen in movies. "I could change your life," Celeste said simply, her eyes holding promises of wealth beyond imagination. "The question is, are you brave enough to let me?" That night, Daniel returned to their small apartment where Maya was reading Liam a bedtime story, her hand resting on her rounded belly. She looked up at him with those trusting eyes, the same eyes that had seen potential in him when he was nobody, that had loved him when love was all they had to offer each other. "How was work, honey?" she asked, shifting to make room for him on their small bed beside their sleeping son. Daniel looked at his wife, really looked at her. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup, wearing one of his old t-shirts because it was comfortable. She was beautiful in the way that mattered, beautiful in the way that lasted. Beautiful in the way that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with soul. But as he kissed her forehead and whispered, "Fine, just fine," Daniel was already making calculations in his mind. Already weighing love against ambition. Already choosing between the woman who had built him up and the woman who promised to elevate him. The tragedy wasn't that he was tempted. The tragedy was that he was already falling. The moment Daniel made his choice, he didn't announce it with grand gestures or tearful confessions. Instead, he did what cowards do. He simply began erasing his family from existence, one lie at a time. When Celeste asked about his personal life during one of their increasingly frequent private conversations, Daniel felt the words form in his throat like poison he was choosing to swallow. "I'm single," he said, the lie rolling off his tongue with surprising ease. "No attachments. No complications." Celeste smiled, the kind of smile that showed perfect teeth and revealed nothing of the soul behind them. "Good. I don't like complications either." What followed was a courtship that felt more like a business transaction wrapped in expensive dinners and designer gifts. Celeste didn't love Daniel, she collected him. She paraded him through exclusive restaurants where the wine cost more than Maya's monthly grocery budget, introduced him to circles where his manufacturing background was seen as charmingly rugged, and slowly began reshaping him into the man she wanted to own. "You need better clothes," she told him one evening, running her manicured fingers along his collar. "A man of your position should look the part." Daniel found himself nodding, already forgetting how Maya used to trace that same collar with work-roughened hands, telling him he was handsome just as he was. Meanwhile, at home, Maya was beginning to notice the changes. Daniel's kisses became perfunctory, his conversations distracted, his presence somehow absent even when he was sitting right beside her. "Everything okay at work?" she asked one night, settling beside him on their couch with a cup of tea cradled in her hands. "Just busy," Daniel replied, not looking up from his phone, a new phone Celeste had insisted he needed for professional purposes. Maya placed her hand on his arm, the way she always did when she sensed he needed comfort. "We can talk about it, you know. Whatever's bothering you." For a moment, Daniel's resolve wavered. This was Maya, his Maya, offering him the kind of unconditional support that had carried them through their darkest days. But then his phone buzzed with a text from Celeste about dinner reservations at a restaurant that cost more than his monthly rent, and the moment passed. "I'm fine," he said, pulling away from her touch. "Really?" The wedding happened with the kind of speed that only unlimited money can buy. 2 months from Daniel's first lie to standing at an altar that cost more than most people's houses, exchanging vows with a woman who saw him as the perfect accessory to her inherited empire. Celeste wore a dress that graced magazine covers. Daniel wore a suit that transformed him into someone Maya wouldn't have recognized. And somewhere across town, Maya was sitting in their tiny apartment, staring at her phone, waiting for her husband to come home. She had tried calling him that morning like she did every morning, wanting to share the news that the baby had kicked for the first time. But his phone went straight to voicemail. Again. "Daniel, it's me," she said to the recording, her voice bright with excitement despite her growing worry. "The baby kicked. Right here, right against my ribs." Liam felt it too and he got so excited he started jumping around saying he's going to teach the baby to play soccer. "Call me back when you can. I love you." The message would never be returned. By evening, when Daniel still hadn't come home, Maya found herself pacing their small living room, one hand on her belly, the other clutching her phone. Liam was asleep in their bed, the only bed in their one-bedroom apartment, and the silence felt suffocating. She tried his work number. Disconnected. She tried calling the factory. "Daniel Thomas? He doesn't work here anymore, ma'am. Left about a month ago." Maya's legs gave out. She sank onto their threadbare couch, the same couch where Daniel had spun her around in joy when she told him about the pregnancy, and felt her world begin to crumble. Days turned into weeks. Bills arrived with increasing urgency. The rent notice appeared on their door like a death sentence. Maya took whatever work she could find, cleaning offices at night, waiting tables during lunch shifts, anything to keep food on the table and a roof over Liam's head. "Where's Daddy?" Liam asked one morning, his 3-year-old eyes wide with confusion. Maya knelt down to his level, smoothing his hair with trembling fingers. "Daddy had to go away for work, sweetheart. But Mommy's here. Mommy's always going to be here." It was the first lie she had ever told her son, but it wouldn't be the last. The stress was eating her alive. She felt it in her bones, in the constant ache in her back, in the way her hands shook when she counted the few dollars she had left for groceries. The baby seemed to sense her distress, moving restlessly inside her, as if trying to comfort her from within. But Maya was strong. She had always been strong. She would find a way to survive this, to protect her children, to build something from the ashes of the life Daniel had burned down. She just didn't know yet how much more she would have to lose before she could begin to rebuild. The rain that night seemed to fall with the weight of Maya's desperation. She had been working 14-hour days, cleaning offices until midnight, then rushing to the diner for the early morning shift that started at 5. Her body was screaming for rest, but rest was a luxury she couldn't afford when the eviction notice on her door gave her less than a week to find money she didn't have. Maya pressed one hand against her swollen belly as she walked home from her cleaning job, feeling the baby's restless movements. Even her unborn child seemed to sense the chaos surrounding them, kicking and turning as if trying to find peace in a world that had become anything but peaceful. "I know, little one," she whispered into the rain. "Mommy's trying. I'm trying so hard." The cramping started just 2 blocks from her apartment. At first she thought it was just exhaustion, her body's way of demanding the rest she couldn't give it. But as the pain intensified, sharp and unforgiving, Maya knew with horrible certainty that something was terribly wrong. She stumbled, catching herself against a lamppost, her breath coming in short gasps. The rain soaked through her thin jacket, mixing with the tears she hadn't realized were falling. People passed by, umbrellas creating small shelters of indifference, no one stopping to help the pregnant woman who was clearly in distress. The pain came in waves now, each one stronger than the last. Maya tried to reach for her phone, but her hands were shaking too violently to dial. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet, and she felt herself falling, until the cold, wet pavement rose up to meet her. When she woke up in the hospital hours later, the silence told her everything she needed to know before the doctor ever spoke the words. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thomas. We did everything we could." Maya didn't cry. Not then. She simply stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the small holes in each square, focusing on anything that wasn't the emptiness she now felt where life had been growing just hours before. The nurse was kind, her voice gentle as she explained what had happened. "The stress, the overwork, the malnutrition, your body was pushed beyond its limits. Sometimes, even when we want something so desperately, our bodies make the choice for us." Maya nodded mechanically, signing papers she didn't read, accepting condolences she couldn't process. When they finally let her go home, she walked back through the same streets where she had fallen, past the same lamppost where she had felt her world collapse, and somehow made it back to the apartment where Liam was waiting with the elderly neighbor who watched him when Maya worked late. "Mommy?" Liam ran to her, his 3-year-old arms wrapping around her legs. "Where were you? Mrs. Patterson said you were at the doctor." Maya knelt down, pulling her son close, breathing in the innocent sweetness of his hair. For a moment she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had lost, but then she pushed it down, buried it deep where it couldn't break her completely. "Mommy had to go to the doctor, baby. But I'm home now." It wasn't until 3 days later, when Liam patted her belly during their bedtime routine and asked, "When is the baby going to come out and play with me, Mommy?" that Maya finally broke. She cried for the child she would never hold, for the husband who had abandoned them, for the dreams that had died on a rain-soaked street. But mostly, she cried for the innocence in her son's eyes that she was about to shatter. The baby had to go to heaven, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Liam's little face scrunched up in confusion. "But I wanted to teach the baby to kick a ball." "I know, baby. I know." Life has a way of testing us in the moments when we feel most broken. Have you ever had to find strength you didn't know you had just to survive another day? Drop a heart in the comments if you've ever felt like Maya in this moment, because what happens next shows us that sometimes our darkest moments prepare us for our greatest victories. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of survival. Maya took every job she could find, her grief a constant companion that she carried like a stone in her chest. She cleaned buildings where executives made decisions that affected thousands of lives, never knowing that one of those executives would soon change hers. It was during one of these late-night cleaning shifts that Maya heard the commotion outside the office building. The sound of struggle, of someone calling for help, cut through the quiet hum of vacuum cleaners and the distant traffic. Maya's first instinct was to ignore it. She had learned the hard way that getting involved in other people's problems usually led to more trouble than she could handle. But then she heard it again, clearer this time. An older man's voice, shaky with fear, crying out for someone to help him. Without thinking, Maya dropped the mop she was holding and ran toward the sound. What she saw when she burst through the building's front doors was an elderly man in an expensive suit being cornered by 2 younger men who were attempting to wrestle a briefcase from his grasp. "Please," the older man was saying, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'll give you money, just don't hurt me." Maya didn't consider the danger. She didn't think about the fact that she was a small woman facing two grown men who were clearly willing to commit violence. She only saw someone who needed help, and despite everything that had happened to her, despite all the ways the world had failed her, Maya Thomas still believed in doing the right thing. She grabbed the heavy mop bucket she had been using and heaved it with all her strength at the attackers. "Get away from him!" she screamed, her voice carrying all the rage and pain she had been holding inside for months. The bucket connected with a solid thud, and the two men, surprised by the sudden intervention, released their hold on the briefcase and fled into the night. Maya rushed to the older man's side, kneeling beside where he had fallen. His face was bloodied, his hands shaking, but his eyes held a clarity that spoke of intelligence and strength, even in his vulnerability. "Thank you," he whispered, accepting the clean handkerchief Maya pulled from her pocket. "You didn't even know me." Maya helped him sit up against the building's wall, her cleaning uniform still damp from the mop water, her hair falling out of its ponytail from the struggle. "Didn't have to," she said simply, checking to make sure he wasn't seriously injured. "Are you hurt? Should I call an ambulance?" The man studied her face in the dim streetlight, something like wonder crossing his features. "You risked your safety for a complete stranger. Why?" Maya shrugged, the question seeming almost absurd to her. "Because it was the right thing to do." 2 weeks passed after the incident with the stranger, and Maya had almost forgotten about the encounter entirely. Her days remained a relentless cycle of work and worry, each morning bringing new challenges she had to face alone. The diner where she waited tables during lunch shifts had become her second home, filled with the familiar sounds of sizzling bacon and clinking coffee cups. It was during one of these ordinary lunch shifts that Maya's world tilted on its axis once again. She was refilling coffee for a regular customer when the television mounted above the bar caught her attention. The local news was broadcasting a story that made her hands freeze around the coffee pot. Billionaire industrialist Richard Belmont died peacefully in his sleep last night at the age of 68, the news anchor announced, her voice carrying the weight of significant loss. Mr. Belmont, who built an empire from a single manufacturing plant, was known for his reclusive nature and his enormous contributions to the local economy. Maya stared at the screen, recognition dawning slowly. The photograph they showed, a formal portrait of a distinguished older man in an expensive suit, looked familiar, though she couldn't quite place where she had seen him before. "Tragic loss," her customer commented, following her gaze to the television. "Man employed half this city one way or another." Maya nodded absently, still studying the photograph. Something about those eyes, that face. But it was what came next that stopped her heart entirely. The camera cut to footage from outside Belmont Industries, where mourners had gathered to pay their respects. And there, standing beside the ornate casket as it was loaded into a hearse, was a face Maya knew better than her own reflection. Daniel. Her Daniel, though he looked nothing like the man who had once shared instant noodles with her in their tiny apartment. This version of her husband wore a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. His hair was styled with expensive precision, his posture carrying a confidence that money could buy. And beside him, her arm linked possessively through his, stood the most beautiful woman Maya had ever seen. Celeste Belmont, the caption identified her, Richard Belmont's daughter and heir. She was everything Maya wasn't, polished, elegant, draped in designer black that somehow made even grief look glamorous. The coffee pot slipped from Maya's numb fingers, crashing to the floor in a cascade of hot liquid and broken ceramic. The entire diner turned to look at her, but Maya couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was seeing. "Maya, honey, you okay?" her manager called out, rushing over with a mop. But Maya wasn't okay. She was watching her husband, her legally married husband, standing as the grieving son-in-law at a billionaire's funeral, playing the role of devoted family member in a life she knew nothing about. "I have to go," Maya whispered, untying her apron with shaking hands. "Maya, your shift isn't over for 3 hours." "I have to go," she repeated, louder this time, her voice cracking with the weight of realization. She ran from the diner, leaving behind confused customers and a manager calling her name. But Maya could only think of one thing: confronting the man who had destroyed her life for a chance at wealth and status. The bus ride to Belmont Industries felt both endless and too short. Maya's mind raced with questions, with anger, with a grief so profound it made her earlier losses pale in comparison. She had thought Daniel had simply abandoned them. She had never imagined he had built an entirely new life with another woman while she struggled to keep their son fed and housed. When the imposing glass tower of Belmont Industries came into view, Maya felt her resolve strengthen. She had lost her husband, her unborn child, her financial security, and her faith in the man she had loved more than life itself. But she still had her dignity, and she was going to make sure Daniel knew exactly what his choices had cost. The security guard at the front desk looked at her with barely concealed disdain, her second-hand clothes and work-worn appearance clearly marking her as someone who didn't belong in such an opulent environment. "I need to see Daniel Thomas," Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Do you have an appointment?" "I'm his wife." The guard's eyebrows shot up. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to." "Maya?" The voice came from behind her, smooth and cultured, carrying just a hint of curiosity. Maya turned to see Celeste Belmont approaching, her black funeral attire somehow making her look even more stunning than she had on television. "Do I know you?" Celeste asked, her head tilted slightly as she studied Maya's face. Before Maya could answer, Daniel appeared, stepping out of an elevator with the confidence of a man who belonged in boardrooms and executive suites. When his eyes met Maya's, every trace of color drained from his face. The silence that followed was deafening. Three people standing in a marble lobby, surrounded by the evidence of wealth and success, while the weight of betrayal hung in the air like smoke. Maya looked at the man she had loved, the man she had built dreams with, the man who had promised her forever. And then she looked at the woman who had taken him from her, beautiful, wealthy, everything Maya could never be. "You left your family for this?" Maya asked, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. And in that moment, as Daniel stammered excuses and Celeste called for security, Maya realized that her journey toward justice was just beginning. Daniel's face went through a series of expressions in those few seconds: shock, fear, calculation, and finally, cold determination. Maya watched her husband transform before her eyes into someone she didn't recognize, someone capable of cruelty she had never imagined possible. "I don't know this woman," Daniel said, his voice carrying just the right amount of confusion mixed with concern. "She's clearly unstable." The words hit Maya like physical blows. Each syllable was a denial of their shared history, their love, their son sleeping peacefully at home with Mrs. Patterson. Daniel wasn't just abandoning her, he was erasing her, making her disappear as if she had never existed at all. "Unstable?" Maya's voice cracked with disbelief. "Daniel, it's me. It's Maya. We have a son together. Liam. Remember Liam? He asks about his daddy every single day." But Daniel's expression remained blank, almost bored, as if he were listening to the ravings of a stranger. "I've never seen this woman before in my life. Security, please escort her out before she causes a scene." Celeste stepped closer to Daniel, her arms sliding possessively around his waist. "Darling, should I call the police? She seems disturbed." Maya felt the world spinning around her. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be the man who had once traced her face with gentle fingers, who had whispered promises of forever against her skin, who had cried with joy when Liam took his first steps. "Daniel, please," Maya whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't do this. Don't pretend you don't know us." But Daniel had already turned away, dismissing her with the casual indifference of someone brushing off an annoying interruption to their day. Two security guards appeared as if from nowhere, their hands firm but not unkind as they took Maya's arms. "Ma'am, you need to leave the premises," one of them said. "If you continue to harass Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, we'll have to involve the police." Mrs. Thomas. The name hit Maya like a sledgehammer. Her name. Her married name. Now being used by another woman while she was treated like an intruder in her own husband's life. As the security guards guided her toward the exit, Maya caught sight of her reflection in the polished marble walls. She saw what they saw, a woman in second-hand clothes, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her hands marked by the honest work that had kept her and Liam alive. Next to Celeste's designer perfection, Maya looked exactly like what Daniel was claiming she was: nobody. The glass doors of Belmont Industries closed behind her with a soft whoosh, the sound of a world she would never belong to shutting her out permanently. Or so she thought. Little Liam was waiting for her when she returned to their apartment, his 3-year-old face bright with the uncomplicated joy that only children possess. He ran to her the moment she walked through the door, his small arms wrapping around her legs. "Mommy? Mrs. Patterson let me help make cookies." Maya knelt down and pulled her son close, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair, letting his innocent warmth chase away some of the chill that had settled in her bones. "That sounds wonderful, baby," she managed, her voice mostly steady. But as they sat together that evening, sharing the cookies Liam had helped make, her son's questions began. "Mommy, why did you go see Daddy today?" Maya's hand stilled on the cookie she was breaking in half. "What makes you think I saw Daddy?" "You smell sad," Liam said with the devastating honesty of childhood. "You always smell sad after you try to call Daddy." Maya looked into her son's eyes, eyes that were exactly like Daniel's, eyes that held the same intelligence and sensitivity that had first made her fall in love with his father. How could she explain that the man who had given Liam life had just denied they ever existed? "Liam," she said carefully, "what would you say if I told you that Daddy might not be able to come home for a very long time?" The little boy's face scrunched up in thought. Did Daddy do something bad? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that a 3-year-old couldn't possibly understand but somehow sensed anyway. "Why did Daddy lie, Mommy?" Liam asked, his voice small and confused. Maya felt her heart shatter all over again. Somehow, her innocent son had picked up on the deception, the betrayal, the fundamental wrongness of what Daniel had done to their family. "I don't know, sweetheart," Maya whispered, pulling him closer. "But Daddy's choices don't change how much Mommy loves you." 1 week later, Maya was sorting through the mail when she found it, an envelope so elegant it seemed out of place among the bills and advertisements. Heavy paper, embossed letterhead, her name written in flowing script that spoke of old money and older traditions. The return address made her hands tremble. The law offices of Hartwell, Blackstone and Associates. Estate Planning Division. Inside, the letter was brief but formal. "Dear Mrs. Thomas, you are cordially invited to attend the reading of the last will and testament of Mr. Richard Belmont, scheduled for this Friday at 2 p.m. in our offices. Your presence is required as you are named as a beneficiary. Please bring proper identification and arrive promptly. Sincerely, Marcus Hartwell Esq." Maya read the letter 3 times, certain she was misunderstanding something fundamental. Richard Belmont, the name was familiar but she couldn't place it. A beneficiary? That was impossible. She had never known any wealthy people, had never done anything that would warrant being mentioned in a billionaire's will. But as she stared at the formal invitation, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Maybe, just maybe, her luck was finally about to change. The law offices of Hartwell, Blackstone and Associates occupied an entire floor of one of the city's most prestigious buildings. Maya felt every eye in the elevator judging her as she rode up to the 32nd floor, her simple black dress, the same one she had worn to her own mother's funeral 2 years ago, marking her as clearly out of place among the designer suits and expensive accessories of her fellow passengers. When the elevator doors opened, Maya stepped into a world of mahogany panels and leather-bound books, where even the air seemed to cost more than she made in a week. The receptionist, a woman whose jewelry probably cost more than Maya's annual rent, directed her to conference room A with a smile that was professional but distant. Maya paused outside the heavy wooden doors, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the brass handle. She had no idea why she was here, what possible connection she could have to Richard Belmont's estate, but something deep inside her whispered that whatever was about to happen would change her life forever. The conference room was exactly what she had expected: imposing, intimidating, designed to make people feel small. A massive table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than Maya's car. But it was the people already seated around that table that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. Daniel sat near the head of the table, looking every inch the successful businessman in his perfectly tailored suit. Beside him, Celeste held court like a queen, her black dress elegant enough for a magazine cover, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. Several men in expensive suits, executives from Belmont Industries, Maya assumed filled out the rest of the gathering. And then there was Maya, standing in the doorway in her second-hand dress, feeling like an imposter who had wandered into the wrong story. "Ah, Mrs. Thomas," said a distinguished older man who could only be Marcus Hartwell himself. "Please take a seat." Maya noticed that the only empty chair was directly across from Daniel and Celeste. As she made her way around the table, she could feel Celeste's eyes on her, assessing, dismissing. Daniel refused to meet her gaze at all, his attention focused on some papers in front of him as if they contained the secrets of the universe. "Now that we're all here," Mr. Hartwell began, "we can begin the reading of Richard Belmont's last will and testament. But first, Mr. Belmont left specific instructions that we begin with a video message he recorded shortly before his death." A large screen descended from the ceiling, and suddenly Richard Belmont filled the room. Maya gasped softly as she recognized him, not from the formal portrait she had seen on the news, but from that night outside the office building. The tired eyes, the grateful smile, the hands that had shaken as she helped him to his feet. The stranger she had saved was Richard Belmont. If you're watching this, Richard's voice filled the room, warm despite his obvious frailty, then I'm gone. But before I left this world, I met someone who reminded me what decency looks like in an age where it seems to have disappeared entirely. Maya felt every eye in the room turn to her, but she couldn't look away from the screen. A woman who risked her own safety to help a stranger, Richard continued, his eyes seeming to look directly at Maya through the camera. A woman who expected nothing and deserved everything. A woman who showed me that genuine goodness still exists in this world. Mr. Hartwell cleared his throat. To Maya Thomas and her son Liam, I leave my entire estate. The business, the properties, the investments, the stocks. Everything. The silence that followed was so complete that Maya could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She stared at the screen, certain she had misheard, certain this was some kind of mistake. Everything, she whispered. But Richard wasn't finished. His image on the screen seemed to grow more intense, more purposeful. As for Celeste, he said, his voice taking on a different tone, you were raised as my daughter and I loved you as such. But the DNA test I had done last month confirmed what I had suspected for years. You are not my biological child. You are the daughter of the woman I once loved, but not of my blood. Celeste's sharp intake of breath cut through the silence like a knife. Maya watched in fascination and horror as the other woman's perfect composure began to crack. And in all your 32 years, Richard continued, his voice heavy with disappointment, you never once understood the value of what I built. You saw money as something to spend, power as something to wield over others, and love as something to purchase. Celeste stood up so suddenly her chair fell backward. This is impossible, she said, her voice shrill with panic. He can't do this. I'm his heir. I've always been his heir. Mr. Hartwell's voice was calm, professional. The will is completely legal and binding, Ms. Belmont. DNA evidence supporting Mr. Belmont's claims is part of the estate documentation. Maya watched Daniel's face as the reality of the situation sank in. He had abandoned his family for a woman who had just lost everything. He had traded genuine love for fool's gold, and now he was left with nothing but the weight of his choices. This is insane. Celeste screamed, her designer perfection finally cracking to reveal the entitled, desperate woman underneath. She's nobody. Look at her. She's a cleaning woman, for God's sake. But Maya wasn't looking at Celeste anymore. She was staring at the screen where Richard Belmont's image continued to speak, his words washing over her like a benediction. Maya Thomas showed me that character isn't about what you wear or where you come from. It's about what you do when no one is watching, when there's nothing in it for you, when helping someone else might cost you everything. Maya felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she finally understood. Justice hadn't shouted. It hadn't announced itself with fanfare or drama. It had shown up in a will and quietly rewritten the ending. Maya sat in that mahogany-paneled room, surrounded by the wreckage of other people's expectations, and felt something she hadn't experienced in months, complete peace. Not joy, not excitement, not even relief, just peace. The kind that comes when the universe finally makes sense again. Around her, chaos erupted like a storm breaking against solid ground. Celeste was screaming now, her voice reaching octaves that no amount of finishing school could have prepared her for. This is fraud. This is theft. I'll contest this will. I'll fight this until my dying day. Daniel had gone completely silent, his face the color of old paper as he stared at Maya with something that might have been recognition, not of who she was, but of what he had lost. The magnitude of his choice was written across his features like a map of regret. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, their practiced poker faces struggling to hide their shock. The woman they had probably dismissed as a nuisance, as someone who didn't belong in their world, now owned the company that employed them all. But Maya? Maya simply stood up. She didn't say a word to Daniel. Didn't acknowledge Celeste's hysterics. Didn't address the room full of powerful men who were now trying to recalculate their positions in a world where the cleaning woman had just become their boss. Instead, she walked around the table to where little Liam would have been sitting if he were here, placed her hand on the back of the empty chair, and smiled. Mr. Hartwell, she said, her voice steady and clear, when can we schedule a meeting to discuss the transition? The lawyer, who had probably handled hundreds of will readings in his career, looked at Maya with something approaching admiration. At your convenience, Mrs. Thomas. The estate is yours now. Maya nodded, then did something that would be talked about in those offices for years to come. She walked to where Celeste stood, her perfect makeup now streaked with tears of rage and disbelief, and extended her hand. I'm sorry for your loss, Maya said simply. Losing a father is never easy regardless of DNA. Celeste stared at the offered hand as if it were a snake, her eyes wild with fury. "Don't you dare patronize me, you little nobody." Maya let her hand drop, unfazed. "I'm not patronizing you. I'm just sorry that you never learned what your father was trying to teach you." She turned to leave, and that's when Daniel finally found his voice. "Maya, wait." She paused at the door, her hand on the brass handle, but she didn't turn around. I can explain," Daniel said, his voice cracking with desperation. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I never meant for." "For what?" Maya asked quietly, still not turning around. "For me to find out? For our son to ask why his daddy lies? For me to lose our baby because I was working myself to death trying to survive?" Daniel's silence was answer enough. Maya opened the door and walked out, leaving behind the mahogany and leather, the screaming and the scheming, the world of people who had forgotten that character mattered more than comfort. Have you ever had a moment where you realized that everything you thought was a disaster was actually leading you exactly where you needed to be? Drop a comment and share your story, because sometimes our greatest losses prepare us for our most incredible victories. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you believe that good people don't always finish last. 6 months later, Maya stood in the corner office of Belmont Industries, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the entire city. Her name was etched into the glass door behind her. Maya Thomas, Chief Executive Officer. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been board meetings where men twice her age had questioned every decision she made. There had been late nights learning about quarterly reports and stock options and market projections. There had been moments when she wondered if she was in over her head. But Maya had something that all her expensive education couldn't buy: the ability to see people. Really see them. She knew which employees were struggling to make ends meet because she had been there. She knew which managers were more concerned with politics than productivity because she had watched from the outside as they played their games. She knew what it felt like to be invisible, dismissed, counted out. And she used that knowledge to build something different. Under Maya's leadership, Belmont Industries didn't just survive, it thrived. She implemented profit-sharing programs for factory workers. She created childcare facilities for single parents. She established scholarship funds for employees' children. She did all the things that Richard Belmont had probably dreamed of doing but had never known how to implement. The business world called her a visionary. Financial magazines wrote features about her unconventional management style. Other CEOs sought her advice on employee retention and company culture. But Maya knew the truth: she wasn't special. She had just remembered what it felt like to be human. Liam, now 4 years old, would sometimes visit her at the office, his small hand tucked securely in hers as they walked through the halls of the company that was now his legacy. He didn't understand the magnitude of what had changed in their lives, but he understood that his mother was no longer afraid, that their apartment was warm and safe, that there was always food in the refrigerator and books on his shelves. "Mommy," he asked one day as they rode the elevator to her office, "are we rich now?" Maya knelt down to his level, smoothing his hair with the same gentle touch she had always used, back when they had nothing but love. "We're safe now, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft with contentment. "And that matters more than being rich." Because Maya had learned something that money couldn't teach. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it doesn't announce itself with fanfare or demand recognition. Sometimes it just shows up quietly in the form of an old man's gratitude, and rewrites the ending entirely. As for Daniel and Celeste, their story became a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and country clubs across the city. Daniel tried repeatedly to contact Maya in those first few months. Phone calls that went unanswered. Letters that were returned unopened. He even showed up at Belmont Industries once, only to be escorted out by the same security guards who had once removed Maya at his request. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who witnessed it. He had traded a woman who loved him for his character for a woman who wanted him for his potential wealth. When that wealth evaporated, so did Celeste's interest. She disappeared from public view entirely. Some said to Europe, others claimed she had moved back in with her biological mother. Either way, Daniel found himself alone with nothing but the echo of his choices. Celeste's fall from grace was swift and complete. Without Richard Belmont's name and fortune to sustain her lifestyle, the invitations stopped coming. The friends who had orbited around her wealth found other sons to circle. She had spent 32 years learning how to spend money and wield power, but she had never learned how to earn respect or build genuine relationships. Maya never spoke publicly about either of them. When reporters asked about her former husband or the woman who had expected to inherit the Belmont empire, Maya's response was always the same: I'm focused on the future, not the past. Maya could have become bitter. She could have used her newfound power to destroy the people who had destroyed her. She could have let the pain of betrayal harden her heart until she became as cold and calculating as the world that had tried to break her. Instead, she chose to remain who she had always been. A woman who helped strangers in the dark, who worked multiple jobs to feed her child, who saw the humanity in everyone around her. The only difference was that now she had the resources to act on that compassion on a scale she had never imagined possible. Richard Belmont had recognized something in Maya that night outside the office building, not just her bravery but her character. He had seen a woman who would risk her safety for a stranger and realized he had found someone who understood what true wealth really meant. Because in the end, character is the only currency that never loses its value. It's the only investment that always pays dividends. And it's the only legacy that truly lasts. If Maya's story moved you, if it reminded you that good people don't always finish last, then I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button to show that you believe character matters more than convenience. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that their integrity is worth more than any shortcut. And subscribe to Mr. Ashbourne Golden Narratives because we're just getting started with stories that prove love, honesty, and courage still have the power to change everything. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's one moment in your life when doing the right thing felt like the hardest choice you could make? Your story might be the encouragement someone else needs to hear. Until next time, remember, justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. And sometimes, it shows up in a will and rewrites the ending entirely. Thank you for being part of this incredible community. Keep believing in the power of good stories to inspire good people. I'll see you in the next narrative.